It's been a while since we checked up on that crazy old guy in his old police box, but I think now is a good time to reacquaint ourselves with the Doctor. When last we left him, he had just regenerated into a new form played by Peter Capaldi, and in classic Who fashion, the TARDIS is crashing. It ends up in Victorian London and accidentally takes the Tyrannosaurus Rex along for the ride, which ends up in the Thames River during low tide, thankfully. And it's up to the Paternoster gang, Madame Vastra, Jenny, and Strax, to run crowd control and make sure the T-Rex doesn't eat anyone important. Meanwhile, the Doctor has to deal with his post-regeneration loopiness. He freaks out about his new face, his eyebrows that are furious, his mouth that's always frowning. But he does take solace in the fact that now he's Scottish. He can be indignant about stuff. But he swears he knows this exact face from somewhere. And we all know where. But he doesn't, not yet. Meanwhile, Clara admits that she wants to figure out how to change him back. And this gets Vastra's goat, because, well, having to hide the fact that she's a reptile by letting people claim that she has a skin condition. And yes, people have been born with scaly skin and non-average skin pigmentation. But she has to take it a step further and wear a veil. So, while wearing the veil, she chides Clara about the Doctor's appearance and the fact that falling for him is like falling for a mountain. It's illogical. Because a mountain is so beyond a human, and so is the Doctor. But eventually, she's convinced that Clara does still feel for the Doctor in her own special way, ditching the veil without us even realizing it. Also, there are a couple of good instances of comedy with Clara and Strax. They're a surprisingly good comedy duo. He gives her a medical scan, and she stops him from revealing the exact time she's supposed to die. And he scans her mind, and she's revealed to be a little bit of a narcissist, an egomaniac, and clearly likes watching young men do sports. And there was another scene where Clara asks for the morning paper, and Strax sends it up to her by wanging it straight at her head. That's always hilarious. Slapstick's always good for a laugh, if it's done right. Meanwhile, the Doctor decides to run around London trying to get a hold on things. And since he can speak dinosaur, apparently, he promises that the T-Rex will be sent home. She has his word. 2 seconds later, she spontaneously combusts. And when the Paternasters, Clara, and the Doctor hook back up, everyone's standing at the bank of the Thames wondering, how could this have happened? Who could this have done? Who could have done this? But the Doctor says that's the wrong question. The real question is, have there been similar instances of spontaneous combustion? And yeah, there have been. So while Vastra and Jenny puzzle out what's going on, the Doctor and Clara separately discover an ad in the paper inviting the Impossible Girl to a small restaurant. And eventually they hook back up and find out that it's a trap. The diners that are milling about They're not actually eating. And there's a distinctive clicking noise. It seems the people are in fact clockwork robots in skin suits. And none of them are breathing, which is how the robots distinguish living from clockwork. And so the Doctor and Clara are caught in a trap. The same person that killed a T-Rex and one of the onlookers for his eyes is revealed. A clockwork man with half a face. It seems he is the lead robot on a ship that crashed into Earth from a long time ago. It's from the future, around Captain Jack's era, 51st century, and it's revealed to be the SS Marie Antoinette, the sister ship of the SS Madame de Pompadour. Yes, another instance of clockwork robots trying to use organic bits to repair their ship and themselves. And this guy has repaired himself over and over and over again with organic bits that slowly rot as they wear out, and metalwork that goes back to Roman times. And he's repaired himself so many times, there's nothing left of the original. It's the whole Ship of Theseus debate again. As you replace rotten planks, how long till Theseus's ship becomes a replica of itself? And the weird thing is, they're not trying to get back to the 51st century. They're trying to reach something called the Promised Land. Apparently, the organic bits have stirred human desires for a heavenly paradise. And while the Paternoster gang and Clara managed to fight off the many robots that have taken up residence in the remains of the ship under London, even going so far as to hold their breath for a while to make the robots forget that they were organic. The people they're attacking, that is. The Doctor ends up having to chase the mechanical man into an escape pod, which is lifted out of the ship by a skin balloon. That is both impressive and gross. But eventually the Doctor convinces the robot that there is no promised land, that what he's doing is pointless existence. And while the robot has programming set against self-termination, the Doctor says he's not programmed to kill, so they reach an impasse. Although there is a eventual reconciliation in the fact that the robot ends up impaled on a tower spire somewhere in London, I believe on top of Big Ben. Whether or not he was pushed or simply jumped, that's left up to the imagination. And the Doctor, for some reason, decides to leave Clara behind when he gets back to the TARDIS after victory is assured, because when the lead robot died, all the other robots deactivated. And while Madame Vastra invites Clara to stay with the Paternasters, turns out that's not necessary because the Doctor is back. He's added a bit of flair to his Mark II 11 TARDIS control room, so it's the one I love above all else, aside from the classic. And so, the Doctor and Clara decide to part ways after he gets her home. But She ends up getting a call from 11 just before he transforms into 12. And he admits that this new doctor is going to need her more than she'll ever know. And the pep talk ends up convincing her to stay with him. And so they head out on some new adventures. And wouldn't you know it, their first adventure involves Daleks. We find out that the Daleks, without their parliament, have decided to go back on their classic task of eliminating anyone who's not a Dalek. And we meet Journey Blue, who just lost her brother and is about to be vaporized in a fighter jet that's being pursued by a Dalek saucer. Pants to be darkened. Luckily, she gets transmitted to the TARDIS just before the ship blows up. And, well, at first she's belligerent, even threatening the Doctor. Eventually, he convinces her to be a little more polite and civil. So she has him land on this medical ship that is hiding from the Dalek saucer, and while her uncle, the leader of the group, wants to kill the Doctor to preserve their secret location, he manages to convince them to spare him because they actually have a patient, a Dalek. And you would think, why would they want to fix a Dalek when it's just easier to blow him up? Turns out this Dalek wants to exterminate other Daleks. So, the Doctor grabs Clara after she meets a former soldier named Danny Pink, who now teaches at Coalhill alongside her. We'll get into that later. It's been a while since they've last traveled, and she's grown as a character. In the previous show, or previous episode, she was able to strong-arm the Clockwork Man into not killing her by calling his bluff. The same way some kids who she tried to threaten with expulsion on her first day called her bluff. Forgot to mention that, sorry. But anyway, with the Doctor and Clara together, they, along with Journey Blue and two red shirts, a male and a female, get shrunk down and put inside the Dalek to try and figure out why it wants to destroy other Daleks. After a bit of talking to the mutant inside the chassis, we find out that the Dalek started questioning the quest of its species when it witnessed a star being born. They've blown up tons of stars. But new stars keep forming. Life finds a way. No, excuse me. I meant to say life finds a way. That joke is never going to die. And shout out to those of you who know who I'm talking about. Anywho, the Doctor finds out that there's a radiation leak in the Dalek's main power systems. That's what's causing it to go against its programming. And B, it has mechanical antibodies, which, when some of the soldiers puncture the metal flesh of the Dalek chassis to attach grappling hooks, the male red shirt gets blown up. Well, vaporized. Slowly. Painfully. It's really nasty to watch. And the leftover protein gets sent to the Dalek's, for lack of a better word, stomach. Eventually, the Doctor manages to fix the radiation leak, so they're not going to die of radiation poisoning. Unfortunately, this fixes the Daleks' programming, and it starts exterminating the crew of the medical ship and contacts the saucer. So there's an oops right there. Luckily, the Doctor realizes that if he can access the Daleks' memory and show it the star being born again, its mind will be opened up to new possibilities, and the Doctor can maybe convince it to turn away from its wicked ways. Unfortunately, that costs the female red shirt her life, because she has to attach a grappling hook to get Journey and Clara back up to the memory core to try and jumpstart it. And she gets vaporized. And like the Clockwork Man before her, she ends up in a weird garden park sipping tea with a weird lady called Missy, who says that she and the Clockwork Man before her are now in heaven, the so-called Promised Land. Which I forgot to mention earlier, sorry. And this Missy character is very strange. She knows the Doctor, and she calls him her boyfriend. We don't know who she is, but she may or may not be some sort of ethereal alien. Possibly the Celestial Toymaker, who knows? Meanwhile, Clara and Journey manage to jumpstart the memory core, and the Doctor, after showing Rusty, as he's colloquially known, the star being born, the Doctor does sort of a mind meld with him to show him the beauty of the universe. Unfortunately, the Dalek sees hatred of the Daleks in the Doctor's subconscious and deems it good. And so the Doctor both wins and loses, because this causes Rusty to turn on all the Daleks that have invaded the the spaceship, and annihilate them. And he makes sure to trick the mothership into retreating, so the medical ship and its remaining crew are left alone, and vows to go with them to continue the fight against Daleks. But the Doctor is crestfallen because Dalek's gonna Dalek. He was so sure that he could find one that could do better. If only there were some human factor Daleks still out there. That would be an interesting story. Finding the last remaining human factor Daleks who are trying to just live their lives and maybe build a society that's not bent on destruction. But so far that hasn't happened. And in canon, as far as we know, they're all gone. But that's neither here nor there. So with the day saved, Clara, the Doctor, and Journey return to normal size, and as the Doctor leaves with Clara, Journey asks to come with them to explore, but he says in no uncertain terms, no. He doesn't take soldiers with him, which is kind of sad. Anyway, our next story has Clara picking the time and place and the historical figure, Robin Hood. Yeah, Robin Hood. Now, everyone knows he's just a legend. If there were a character, he's a far cry from the laughing, dashing hero. And yet, they end up finding him in the late 1190s in Sherwood Forest. And there's everyone. There's Friar Tuck, Will Scarlet, Little John. No Maid Marian, although we do see a young woman get kidnapped by the sheriff, who then witnesses her caretaker get stabbed by said sheriff. Now the Doctor thinks that this is obviously all fake. They've got to be robots. They've got to be in some sort of futuristic theme park, because it's fall and Sherwood is way too green. And yet, it all seems so perfect. Excuse me. Especially when the Doctor challenges Robin to a duel, and he uses a spoon. And does pretty well. He even does a trick to knock Robin into a stream over which they're fighting. Of course, Robin knocks him into the stream afterwards. And eventually, it's revealed that Team Hood is going to participate in a contest to see who the best archer is. And now they know it's a trap, but the reward is too great to acknowledge the risk. Meanwhile, it's revealed that the sheriff is using robots dressed as knights to pillage the countryside for gold. Just gold. And he's taking people, along with that young woman, to use as slave labor. And anyone who's too exhausted to work gets vaporized, as the poor girl witnesses. Eventually we come to the contest, where the Doctor does his best to show up Robin with trick arrows. And eventually, Robin, Clara, and the Doctor are taken into custody, as per the Doctor's plan. Because if you want to find out the bad guy's plan, get taken prisoner. And while the Doctor and Robin bicker like an old married couple, Clara finally tells him to shut up. And as it turns out, as per Robin's intuition, there was a guy listening to see who was the leader of that particular trio. And while both Robin and the Doctor get ready to be taken to see the sheriff, the guy takes Clara, because she's obviously the brains of the outfit. And she buddies up to the sheriff to try and figure out his plan. Turns out he wants more power than what he's been given by the phony King of England, Prince John. Yeah, the same Prince John that the Fifth Doctor met, which turned out to be Chameleon the Robot, who was also the brother of the original King John, Prince John, who was also the brother of the same Richard the Lionheart we met in the Crusade. So basically, we're doing Doctor Who's greatest hits. Anyway, turns out a spaceship crashed into Sherwood and disguised itself as a castle, and the robots on board, who are searching for the Promised Land, apparently. Again with the Promised Land. They need to get back into orbit to continue their journey, but their ship is too far badly damaged. So they've been trying to repair it using gold circuitry, which could work. Gold is used in circuitry. But unfortunately, the Doctor realizes the damage is too severe. Without his help, they'll blow up and take out the whole of Sherwood. Luckily, Clara manages to outwit the sheriff, and Robin and the Doctor eventually manage to escape, despite their personalities clashing. And Robin, having guessed certain things, decides to take Clara back to the hideout of Team Hood, and finally interrogates Clara about exactly who and what the Doctor is. And yeah, she spills. She's kind of a motor mouth when it comes to the Doctor. Meanwhile, the Doctor finds out that not only was the sheriff able to convince the robots to serve him, to help him use the spaceship to take over the world, of course, but they actually upgraded him somewhat to be a bit of a cyborg, able to do things far superior to any human. And Robin finds out the hard way when he eventually shows up in the assembly chamber along with the Doctor and Clara to fight the sheriff. The Doctor and Clara think smart. They find out that the laser technology that the robots employ is actually weak to reflective surfaces, and the Doctor and the young woman from earlier convinced the prisoners to use whatever reflective surface they have left to redirect the lasers back at the robots, which succeeds. Meanwhile, Robin fights the sheriff, who reveals his upgrades and the fact that he's able to wear down Robin very quickly and even wound him. But luckily, Robin is smart. He utilizes the same tactic the Doctor used on him to knock the sheriff into the molten gold, which kills him. Even though he was strong enough to partially climb out, not enough to fully survive. Meanwhile, the robots have finished cobbling their ship back together and try to lift off. The Doctor, Clara, and Robin get everyone to safety, but unfortunately the ship is too weak to lift off. Luckily, the gold arrow that was the prize from the contest earlier, they still have it. And with that, they can use it to launch the ship, hopefully out of the atmosphere, so it'll explode at a safe distance. But since Robin is too injured and the Doctor and Clara are too inexperienced, the three of them manage to hold the bow carefully, and with Robin's accurate eyes, manage to hit the target, and the ship blows up in outer orbit safely. And also, radiation leaking from the core of the ship was the reason that the forest was so green. So quickly, autumn starts to fall, but we don't see that happen. Though we do get a little last-minute banter from Robin and the Doctor. After Clara told him the truth, that he's just a legend, also showing picture of Patrick Troughton as Robin Hood, because he actually played the character once. That was a nice little in joke. A little Easter egg, I should say. He's a little crestfallen to find out he's fallen into legend, but then he comments that the Doctor is very similar. Born into upper class, compelled to fight for the downtrodden when he sees them in pain. But rather than living in the forest, the Doctor just stole a TARDIS and started gallivanting all over the galaxy. which Clara wasn't supposed to mention, but Clara's going to talk. And so, Clara and the Doctor part from Robin as friends, with the Doctor even leaving a little surprise for Robin. Turns out the woman from earlier, she was Maid Marian the whole time. And so those two live happily ever after, passing into legend. Next, we find out that the Doctor has been traveling alone for quite some time. See if I can adjust this a little bit. Okay. So yeah. And he's come across an anomaly in time and space. Everyone seems to have the same dream. They're in bed, they wake up, they hear something, they turn on the light, they go into a seating position with their legs on the floor, and then something grabs their ankle. And then there are these niggling little feelings that they're not alone. People who talk to themselves, people who swear that the thing they put on the table was in one spot when really it was in another spot. The hairs on the back of their neck standing up, it's all connected somehow. What if every life form actually has some kind of constant companion that follows them like a shadow? The thing in the edge of the mirror, the thing at the corner of your eye, the thing under the bed. It's a very old legend, but it's constant. Even the Doctor's had the dream. Even Clara's had the dream. So, the Doctor recruits Clara for some help. After she goes on a date with Danny Pink. Remember him? Problem is, it ends poorly because let's just say they're just not open enough for each other. There's too much secrecy, and Danny can tell that he's being lied to, so that's a bit of a sticking point. Also, people keep making flippant jokes about his time as a soldier and whether or not he killed people or killed other soldiers. And early on, we see that there's a bit of PTSD right in there. So yeah, Clara's date goes badly at first. Then she's recruited by the Doctor to figure out what this weird dream that everyone seems to be having is. So he turns off all the safeguards and plugs her hands into the gooey psychic circuitry of the TARDIS to try to send her into her own past, to when she had the dream. Unfortunately, she gets distracted and they end up in an orphanage. And they meet a kid named Rupert, whose last name is Pink, and who really wants to change his first name at the earliest opportunity. Obviously, this is Danny, and eventually, while the Doctor talks to the person in charge of the orphanage, Clara buddies up to the future Danny Pink, and we find out that he doesn't like being near his bed because there's always something under it. And Clara points out that, yeah, there is. Her. And she has him get under the bed with her to try to help allay his fears. And then something sits on the bed, covered in one of Danny's blankets. And while they're hoping it's just a kid, it seems to be too tall to be a kid. Luckily, the doctor is there to help figure out what's going on. Now, you would think they would just rip off the sheet, find out who it is. But no. Apparently, it's a creature that lives to hide. Perfect camouflage. And the doctor theorizes that it only reveals itself to the very young, the very old, and the very crazy. Anyone who wouldn't be believed if they told about what they saw. And through this, we get some setups, like one of the toy soldiers, which is missing a gun, is basically given to Rupert, the future Danny, to be his good luck charm. He calls it Dan the Soldier Man, which sets up his timeline. And the doctor tells him that being afraid is not only okay, it's great. Because of the adrenaline rush of fear, you get basically superpowers. And yeah, that's true. The fight or flight urge does allow for the ability to escape from danger or fight it off. He also makes Danny promise never to look at the thing that is under the sheet. So they all turn their backs on it until it leaves. And so, they head back to the present, and Clara decides to maybe give Danny another chance, although she accidentally calls him Rupert, which he never told anyone before. And her evasiveness causes Danny to peace out. But that's not the crux of this particular section of the story, because a guy dressed in an astronaut-style suit, or a scuba suit, or whatever you want to call it, beckons Clara back to the TARDIS, which is in the kitchen of the restaurant where Danny and Clara happen to be. That can be sanitary. And Clara thinks it's the doctor, and after Danny leaves in a huff, Clara enters the TARDIS only to find out that it's some guy who looks like Danny, but calls himself Orson. Orson Pink. From about 100 years in Earth's future. He's a time-traveling pioneer. They used some sort of cannon to shoot him into the future. He was supposed to go to the middle of next week, but ended up going to the end of all things. And yet, he's got a fear that there's something outside wanting to get in. So, the doctor decides to have Clara and Orson wait in the TARDIS while he confronts the thing, which nearly costs him his life because it breaks the oxygen seal around the facility where Orson is stationed and nearly kills him. Meanwhile, we get hints that Orson is not only related to Danny, but also Clara. There are hints that his great-grandparents were time travelers, and he even has the little soldier that Clara gave young Danny. Meanwhile, after the doctor gets put back in the TARDIS and something tries to break in again, Clara tries to use the psychic circuits to get the duck out of Fudge and save them all, only to land in a barn with a bed and a kid crying in the bed. And while she tries to ask whether or not it's Danny or Orson, she hears people coming and so hides under the bed and overhears hints that she might be on Gallifrey and this kid crying might be the Doctor, because two of the kid's caregivers mentioned him having to join the army because he'll never be able to become a Time Lord. But then, when the Doctor wakes up and tries to see what's going on outside, the kid overhears voices that are not familiar and tries to get out of bed. So Clara grabs his ankle and politely asks him to get back in bed because it's just a dream. But the kid's still crying, so while his eyes are closed, she pets his head and tells him fear is okay because fear is a superpower. Fear brings people together. And after leaving the tin soldier, Dan the soldier man, with him, she says something that Ian actually, I believe it was Ian, or possibly the Doctor, says way back in the Hartnell era. She says, fear makes companions of us all. And so when she gets back into the TARDIS, she begs the Doctor not to go into his own timeline by stepping out of the TARDIS. And she hugs him despite his protests, and as they head back to drop Orson off in his time, she thinks about what she said to the young Doctor, that one day he was going to come back to that very barn as the War Doctor, and he was going to be very, very scared. And then she gives him the pep talk about how fear is not a bad thing. Yep. Time is folding in on itself. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey indeed. And so, ultimately, Clara goes back to present day Danny to talk about stuff, maybe lay down some truth. And the Doctor is reminded that sometimes he needs to listen. And with that, the first segment of our look at the Capaldi era of Doctor Who has come to a close. When next we meet, things are going to get weird, but in a good way. Until then, this is Mr. J signing out and reminding you, you're never alone, and to always listen. Because you never know when the monster under the bed is going to be Jenna Coleman offering some kind words.